So this is actually the last day of the parliamentary year. We are about to start summer recess, and we're doing inside the Lords, but to confuse things, we're doing it outside the Commons, really, on the Commons terrace. But anyway, we're sort of in the environs. Seems fitting. Just a quick couple of reflections on the last couple of weeks, because I didn't do an Inside the Lords last week. Obviously, it's been, in some ways, a very busy political time, but the busy political time has been the defenestration of a Prime Minister and the replacement of him through this ludicrous argument about who's going to be the head of the Conservative Party, which has been unsavoury to say the least. And so even though everywhere you look people are involved in political discussions, they're not really political discussions, they're personality discussions. So it's a very frustrating period if you're not a member of the Conservative Party, or you're not one of its MPs who can vote. And my view has been that I was very enthusiastic about somebody like Kemi Badenoch. And you could say, well, why do you care who heads up the Tory party? But this is going to be the Prime Minister. And the frustration for many voters is that they aren't members of the Conservative Party, but they, for example, voted for Boris Johnson in 2019. The energy that came with that was based on the energy of 2016 and the Brexit vote. And now they're just kind of like sidelined, watching. And that sense of disenfranchised, fury, I think, on the one hand, they didn't think Boris should have gone, not because they were enthusiastic about it, but they wanted to be the ones who made that decision. And now they're in a situation where a lot of even Conservative members are furious that they have been left with two continuity candidates no one knew. And so it says something about the politics of today that we're watching on. We're just bystanders, all of us, to what's unfolding, yet this person will run the country for 2 years. I mean, I know it's a system, but it's just that somehow it symbolises something more important. The second thing to say is that I've really been struck in the House of Lords in the last couple of weeks about what's not said, who are not discussed. And this particularly came to a head in relation to the debate that was put on by the Labour Party on the plight of women and girls in the 21st century. And it was one after another a series of what I would describe as platitudinous speeches about women in STEM, or women facing violence against men, and all of the things that you would imagine that you would hear. None of them made a very important point that actually Ella Whelan makes in her latest letter on Liberty about the danger of turning women into victims by constantly focusing on the violence and the safety question, protecting women. So that was frustrating, and I didn't make that point either when I spoke. But I did make an intervention around Telford and the grooming gangs, because the Telford report had come out, and I cannot get over to this minute that this terrible scandal of thousands of young girls being, this isn't like hands on knee stuff, this is like raped and sexually abused and humiliated and trafficked and all the rest of it. It's been going on in this country, and it's not even referred to. And we know the reason it's not referred to is because people don't want to appear to be, they don't want to talk about the Pakistani Muslim perpetrators, largely Pakistani Muslim perpetrators, and they don't want to be accused of racism. And that's what all the reports have said. But still, I thought that maybe once the official reports were out, done by respectable QCs, and the police had done sorries, that there would at least be some courageous people who'd say, now we can raise it in Parliament. Not a dicky bird. And that is very frustrating. I was glad that some of the people who spoke took the opportunity of talking about matters around gender critical issues and young girls being who were transitioning, the problem of sex education, all of those kind of issues. That's very important. But I still couldn't get over the fact that this was just never referred to. The second thing that's not ever referred to is we might as well never have had a lockdown. Right, so this lockdown is just never referred to now. It's like being gaslit, right? You're having a conversation about how do we get into this mess in the economy. Nobody mentions the lockdown. Of course the lockdown doesn't cause a recession, but if you close down the economy, it has an impact. And then we have endless discussions about mental health in young people. Real problem. Nobody mentions the fact that one of the things that we do know is that lockdown had a discombobulating impact on young people, and that there are indications that a lot of them, young children in particular, were not able to develop properly, that there's all sorts of non-attendance at school, young people losing their confidence. Now, I don't want to overstate that, but just the fact that you could have a moral panic about mental health in young people and not mention the lockdown drives me mad. And today there's a report on that's just come out about prisons during lockdown, and the shock horror headline is that prisoners were locked in their cells for 23 hours in solitary confinement every day throughout lockdown. Can you imagine how barbaric that is? This report comes out and says there's been a massive increase in mental health problems in prisons because of lockdown. It does say that. No one rushing in the House of Lords to discuss it, and no one saying, well, we knew this years ago. I mean, very early on, when in fact the Academy of Ideas did the lockdown inquiry report, which you may or may not remember, Michael Campbell wrote an article for that on Indeed, this very issue of people being locked up for 23 hours in their cells, and it was widely known but ignored. One of the things which I was most proud of doing recently was I went and spoke at the Birmingham Salon that had been arranged on justice and also on prisons, and I was talking about the making of law, and there was a panel discussing actually this very point about what had happened during lockdown to prisoners, and also just the whole nature of what prison is for. And that whole event was inspired by Helena Goldberg, our dear friend, and it was a surprise to me. I've known Helena for many years, and she recently died, and it was literally a few weeks before she died, which was a tragedy at 56 that she did die. But at it, she spoke passionately in support of a humane treatment of prisoners, and she was no, bleeding heart liberal, but she knew as a humanist that was a hugely important way that we treated even the most, people who committed the most awful, heinous crimes. But she also wanted to be very clear that lockdown had led to these hidden tragedies, and part of that was what happened in prison. So well done to Helena Goldberg, who even in agony, as she was so very poorly, made that a public event, and I'm just humbled that I was able to speak at it. And so, although I don't want to be one of those people who continually goes on about the terrible things happened in lockdown, I think the sort of almost denialism that anything happened is indicative of the fact that we have a parliament that just wants to move on. People in this place brought in legislation that had devastating impacts on the economy, on sociability, on young people's education, on what happened to in prisons, some awful experiences for people in care homes, all of the things that we know, and no one will discuss it here. So I think that one of the things that I've learned in this last parliamentary session is that if I do nothing else, maybe I can give voice to some of those things that nobody else will talk about, and just act as some kind of like warning, or just give expression to the frustration of people looking on at the parliamentary system and thinking they don't even talk about the important things. And there's no point just saying we should talk about the cost of living crisis. These are just words, right? You have to actually know something about what's happening in society and then be prepared to argue about it. I'm going to have a really nice time not being in Parliament. No disrespect to my colleagues, and they're all being very loud now, end of term. It's like the student union or something. But I'm going to really enjoy not being here for the next 4 or 5 weeks. But I won't be not working, and one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is having a bit more intellectual headroom and time to work with my colleagues at the Academy of Ideas and make sure that we have the Battle of Ideas Festival absolutely spot on in terms of the programme reflecting the kind of issues that we need to discuss. And as I've often said, creating a public square and a forum where politics really will be discussed in a far more subtle, nuanced and in-depth way than anything you'd either hear in the Commons, the Lords, or in a Tory leadership battle hustings. So watch this space and I'll keep in touch with you. The final thing is that Boris Johnson apparently, according to Rishi Sunak's, I mean, he can tell if this is just like smear tactics. It's been said that he's going to dump 30 new peers on the Lords, and there's going to be a load of Tory peerages given out. And, you know, there's a sort of funny bit, which is like Nadine Dorries might get a peerage because she might not get a job anywhere else, let's be honest, because none of the candidates look like they give her one. Or that Paul Dacre might get one because he the Daily Mail, former Daily Mail editor. But, you know, there's also rumours that Nicholas Soames might get one, who was one of the people who stabbed Boris in the back and was a major Remainiac and so on. So God knows. But what is likely to happen is that there'll be a lot more new peers. This is an indication of how ridiculous the system is, that, you know, an outgoing Prime Minister can just kind of bring in a load of people. Yes, I know the irony that I was one of the people that was brought in under that system. And if ever there was an indication of the fact that House of Lords is not represents a democratic deficit, that's it. On the other hand, those people who complain and say this is a corrupt system, he's doing cronyism, I have to sit on the Labour benches with cronies gone mad. You know, absolutely. It's stuffed full of Lib Dem cronies, Clegg cronies, Kinnock cronies, Tony Blair cronies. So I do not think that this is a weakness of Boris Johnson. I think it's a weakness of the system, and I will refuse to leave my seat behind the Labour benches, because when it comes to it, I hope that I do remind them of the people they betrayed in the Brexit years and still continue to betray, even though Starmer reckons he's going to be pro-Brexit. Even if it means that I get heckled every time I speak by the Labour benches, even if it's David Blunkett, of all people, you know, who heckles me no matter what I say, even if he disagrees with me, just to be sectarian. But I don't care, because the only job that's worth having in the House of Lords is to say the unsayable and to get on their nerves and hopefully represent some of the views that you think need to be spoken truth to power in the House of Lords. But have a good summer.